Okay, so hi, we're going to continue with our videos in psychological statistics. And in this video, we're going to talk about the two types of analysis. Some I have mentioned already in the previous video, which is in the classification of research objectives, but let's try to get through it. We have two types of analysis in statistics, namely descriptive and inferential analysis. So descriptive and inferential analysis. Actually, the definition of it as an analysis is pretty much the same as its description as a branch of statistics. So, you get to go back with the root words and you will not get lost, For descriptive analysis, this is only limited to the description of a particular data set or a group that we are studying. So, if ever we will be studying a certain sample from a big population, say for the whole psychology first years in a certain university, we're going to study only a group of them, only a sample. And if ever we're going to make use of descriptive analysis on that data, we can only describe that sample, but we cannot apply the description outside that study group or outside that data set. Okay? A conclusion cannot be applied to cases outside the study group. So for example, if we're going to get the general characteristic of that group, say for example getting the mean, the median or mode, or the measure of variability, the range or the SD, we are only limited to use that within that certain group. We cannot apply that outside the group. And we cannot conclude, most importantly, we cannot conclude the results outside from that study group. Whereas in inferential analysis, the application of the findings or conclusion from this small group can be applied or must be applied, shall we say, to a large group from which the smaller group was drawn. Let me rephrase that application of the findings or conclusion from a sample to a population is happening. Okay? So whatever we find, say for example we have found that there's a relationship between grades and relationship status. And we have found out that in that sample it is true. When we are applying inferential statistics, we should interpret that this event is not only happening isolated from this small group, but it should be reflected to the larger group. That's why sampling is important, because whatever result we have from that small group, it will and it must be reflected on the bigger group, which we call the population. So hence, inferential statistics is actually always about, like I always say, inferential stat is always about the population, but not only based on the sample. So talking about that, let me have this chart or diagram, shall we say. Here in the population study, when we get our values, when we get our data from the population, we first start with the collection of data. Since we will be applying a census right here, we're going to collect data. Afterwards, we're going to organize data. Presentation, we present data, and we analyze data. So take note, we COPA, okay? We collect, organize, present, analyze data. Every time we perform a census or a population study, right after analysis, we can go directly to conclusion. Okay? Since, take note that conclusions must always be about the population, not only from the sample that we got. Contrary to that, on the flip side, we have a sample study wherein you're going to get only a small part of that population and make that small part, that we call that a sample, to be the representation of that population. Of course, before you collect data, it is a must that you should sample first. Perform a sample or a sampling, shall we say. You choose the most appropriate sampling technique. You determine your sample size N. We're going to talk about that in the future events or in the future videos. But the important thing is, sampling is crucial because determining this sample, this number of individuals that would represent the whole group, is very important. And most of the cases, if not all, sampling error is one most common error in research papers, wherein they did not choose the sample correctly, and they proceeded with the study or with the research, and of course it ended up to be wrong because of that sampling error. So again, sampling is very important. I want to re-emphasize that and re-emphasize that always, all the time. So correct and proper, appropriate sampling techniques must always be put into consideration. We're going to talk about sampling techniques in a future video. After you have determined your sample ready, you can proceed with COPA. You know, the same thing with the population study. Collect, organize, present, analyze data. But wait, there's more. Okay, right after you analyze, when you perform a sample study, you must interpret. Okay, why do we need to interpret, sir? Interpretation is key because, take note, the data that you have here in the sample study is based on a sample, not based on the population, not based on the big guy, but from a representation of this big population. Hence, when you analyze, you need to reflect that analysis of yours to the bigger population. Okay, to the population, to what the study is all about. Our study is not all about the sample, right? The sample is just a representation of the population, but when we do a sample study, we should interpret and reflect the results, the analysis, to the population. Hence, that's why we apply inferential statistics in sample study. We will not apply inferential statistics in the population study, especially when you're doing a census, because the results here are straightforward. Alright? You have the data of everybody. You don't need to infer because you have everybody's data. Since you have that, analysis is enough to conclude. Okay? You don't need to interpret or to infer and reflect it to a bigger population because you already have everybody's data. Okay? Whereas, in a sample study, it is a need to interpret because you don't have everybody's data. Okay? So you need to put that in consideration. This sample, okay, this sample of yours, again, must be a representation of that. Because whatever you did in this process, okay, will be reflected to the population and not only to this small sample here. Okay? And right after you interpret, you conclude, and always, conclusions are always about the population. Okay? So again, I want to iterate, when you perform a population study, when you perform a census, we do not interpret because the results are straightforward. When we perform a sample study, sampling is crucial and interpretation is a must to reflect back to the population, and then that's when we can conclude. Okay? Some important things that one needs to put into mind every time we're doing research. Please avoid doing a population study but you use inferential statistics to arrive at the conclusion. This is one common error, everyone. So when you perform a population study, when you gather everybody's data, when you perform a census, shall we say, you do not need inferential statistics because you do not need to infer. Right? You don't need to reflect the results of your study from the sample going to the population because the results are straightforward. Everybody's data are there already. So you don't need to do much detail because it's straightforward. Everybody's data are there. Okay? You don't need really to interpret. Okay? Analysis is enough, and then you can go on with the conclusion already. When you're doing a sample study, but you did not use inferential statistics to arrive at the conclusion, is also one error. Again, our research papers are always about the population. That's why in the research process, it is number 2 to determine the population, because all your results must be about them. Not about the sample, but about them. Hence, if you are doing a sample, if you're getting or representing your big population into a sample, it is a must that you will use inferential stat. Okay? Or else it will be faulty. Alright? All your results will be based on the sample. I mean, in the first place, it's a population. It's the one that you want to study, right? Why didn't you use inferential stat? Because it's a must to reflect that back to the population, whatever result you have. So it's a must when you're doing a sample study. A big remember here, inferential statistics is applied only in order to generate conclusion about the population based on the sample data. Again, let me read it again. Inferential statistics is applied only in order to generate conclusion about the population based on sample data. If you have the population data, you don't need to infer. If you only have the sample data, it's a must to infer. And I end this video with that statement. Thank you very much.